While working as a waitress on a cruise ship, a woman froze in horror upon seeing her husband, who had died 7 years earlier. When she mustered the courage to approach him, what she heard made her heart sink. Olga had been on edge all morning, her body signaling that something significant was about to happen, though she couldn't bring herself to admit it. She was exhausted, constantly nauseous, and gripped by an inexplicable feeling that something was different. Her husband, Ivan, also noticed Olga's unusual behavior, but brushed it off. That day, after much hesitation, Olga decided to visit a pharmacy and buy a pregnancy test. Deep down, something told her she was ready to hear life-changing news. Back home, her hands trembled as she held the test. The ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound breaking the silence in the small bathroom where Olga waited anxiously. Her breathing was slow, but each second felt like an eternity. Finally, a line appeared, then a second one. She was pregnant. With a racing heart and a mix of shock and joy, Olga looked in the mirror. It was real. After years of trying, they were finally going to be parents. Unable to contain herself, she burst into loud, joyful laughter that came from the depths of her soul. Ivan wasn't home at the time, but Olga couldn't wait to share the news. She grabbed her phone and called him, her voice shaking with excitement. "Vanya, I have something to tell you," she said, holding back tears. "What's wrong, honey? Are you okay?" he asked, concerned by her tone. "We're having a baby." Olga blurted out, no longer able to hold it in. On the other end of the line, Ivan went silent for a moment before exclaiming with joy, "I can't believe it. Olga, are you serious?" "Yes, Vanya, it's true. We're going to be parents," she replied, now sobbing openly. "I'm coming home right now." "Wait for me," he said, thrilled, before hanging up and rushing back. When Ivan arrived, Olga was still in the living room, clutching the pregnancy test, barely able to process that it had finally happened. As soon as he walked through the door, he wrapped her in a tight embrace, lifted her off the ground, and gently spun her around. "I can't believe it," he said, looking in her eyes with awe. "This is the best day of my life." Olga smiled, nodding. "I can't believe it either," she replied. Ivan knelt before her, softly placing his hands on her stomach as if he could already feel something, though they both knew it was too early. "I can't wait to meet our baby," he whispered. Olga looked at him tenderly, running her fingers through his hair. But there was another secret she hadn't yet shared. That morning at the clinic where she had her blood test done, the doctor had given her more unexpected but joyful news. "It's not just one baby, Vanya," Olga began with a sly smile. Ivan looked at her, confused, not fully grasping what she meant. "What are you saying?" he asked with a nervous laugh. Olga took his hands in hers, looked him straight in the eyes, and savored the moment. "We're having twins," she whispered. Ivan's eyes widened in shock, and his surprise quickly turned into laughter filled with pure happiness. "Twins?" he exclaimed, his voice echoing through the room. "I can't believe it. This is incredible." Olga laughed along with him, their joy almost tangible. Ivan hugged her again, even tighter this time, as if he never wanted to let go. In that moment, all their problems and the struggles of recent years seemed to vanish. All that mattered was the future with their 2 children awaiting them. That night, lying in bed, wrapped in each other's arms, they began making plans for the future. They talked about baby names, how to prepare the house for the twins, and all the dreams they wanted to fulfill as a family. Life seemed perfect, and for the first time in a long while, Olga felt complete peace. "I promise we'll always be together, no matter what," Ivan said, kissing her forehead before they drifted off to sleep. Though his words brought her comfort, fate had other plans that would change their lives forever. In the days following the pregnancy news, Olga and Ivan were over the moon. They began imagining what life with twins would be like, picturing every detail with excitement. Olga couldn't stop touching her stomach, even though it hadn't yet changed. To her, those babies were already the most important thing in the world. Ivan tried to stay calm, but Olga began to notice something off about his behavior. At times, she caught him lost in thought, staring into the distance with a hidden unease. "Is everything okay?" she'd ask. "Of course, honey. I'm just thinking about how lucky we are," he'd reply, kissing her forehead. But Olga sensed something wasn't right. Maybe it was just fear of the changes ahead. One morning, a week after they learned about the pregnancy, Olga woke up with a strange feeling. Ivan had left early for a work meeting, but something inside her told her things weren't okay. She tried to ignore it, but a few hours later, around noon, she received a call that turned her world upside down. "Is this the wife of Ivan Petrov?" a cold, official voice asked. "Yes, that's me," Olga replied, her heart racing. "I'm sorry to inform you that your husband was in a car accident. His vehicle was found in a rural area, but we couldn't locate his body. Authorities are searching the area, but we have no further information at this time," the officer said with a calmness that sharply contrasted with Olga's rising panic. Olga rushed to the hospital, clinging to the hope that it was all a mistake, a mix-up. But when she arrived, the reality was worse than she could have imagined. Ivan's car had been found wrecked at the bottom of a ravine. The police explained that the crash was so severe that survival was nearly impossible. Despite extensive search efforts, there was no trace of Ivan. Hours passed in a fog of despair. Family and close friends gathered at the hospital, trying to support Olga, though everyone knew no words could comfort her in that moment. As night fell, hope of finding Ivan alive faded. Olga refused to accept the reality. Her heart couldn't fathom that Ivan was gone forever. Without a body, there was no certainty. The police told her the search would continue, but the chances were slim. That night, Olga sat alone in the hospital waiting room, cradling her stomach, seeking solace in the tiny lives growing inside her. "They'll find him. He can't just be gone," she whispered to herself repeatedly. But the following days brought no answers. The search was eventually called off, and Olga was left with the horrifying reality that her husband was never coming back. The world kept turning, but for her, time stopped the moment she got that call. The news of her pregnancy, which had brought so much hope just a week earlier, now felt like a cruel reminder of a life that would never be. But life didn't stop, and soon Olga faced a new ordeal. Just days after the accident, strangers began showing up at her door, men with stern faces and threatening glares. They were debt collectors, demanding repayment of a massive debt Ivan had left behind. Still reeling from her loss, Olga knew nothing about this money. Ivan had never mentioned any financial troubles, let alone debts of this magnitude. "Your husband owed a lot of money," one of the men said, eyeing her small apartment with contempt. "And now that he's gone, you're the one who has to pay." "I don't have that kind of money. I didn't know anything about this," Olga replied, her voice trembling. "That's not our problem. You have 3 months to come up with the money, or things will get worse," the man declared before leaving. Olga was left alone in her apartment, grappling with the weight of Ivan's loss and now the pressure of an enormous debt she didn't know how to pay. The future she and Ivan had planned together crumbled before her eyes. Pregnant and alone, she had to find a way to survive. The pain of losing her husband mixed with fear for the safety of her unborn children. But deep down, Olga knew she had to be strong, not just for herself, but for the twins who were her only hope for a fresh start. Though fate had taken so much from her, Olga wasn't ready to give up. Days turned into weeks, and Olga realized her life had changed irreversibly. Dreams of a happy family with Ivan and their children turned into a daily struggle for survival. Bills piled up, the collectors wouldn't leave her alone, and the pain of Ivan's absence remained as sharp as the day she learned of his accident. Yet Olga knew she couldn't let herself break. She had to find a way forward for her children. A week after the accident, Olga tried selling some belongings to scrape together any money she could. Ivan had left little of value, but every dollar she managed to earn offered temporary relief from the constant threats. She knew it wasn't enough. The debt was too large, and time was running out. She tried talking to the collectors, explaining that she was doing everything she could, that she was pregnant and alone. But they didn't care. "Time's up," one of the men said coldly, glaring at her. "You're on the clock." The fear Olga felt in that moment was indescribable. She couldn't rely on these men's mercy. If she didn't find the money, she feared not only for her life, but for her children's as well. In desperation, Olga took any job she could find, no matter how grueling. She worked as a cleaner in offices for meager pay and took overnight shifts at 24-hour stores, working until dawn. Exhaustion began to take over, and her body struggled under the strain. Pregnant with twins, the physical and emotional toll was becoming unbearable, but she didn't allow herself to rest. She had no time for it. The threats continued, the interest on the debt grew, and the deadline loomed closer. Sometimes, after long shifts, Olga allowed herself a moment of weakness. Sitting in her dark apartment, feeling the faint movements of her babies, tears streamed down her face. She cried for Ivan, for the life they had planned and would never build. She cried out of fear of the threats and uncertainty about whether she could protect her children. "I'm sorry, my darlings," she whispered, rubbing her stomach. "But I promise I'll do everything to keep you safe." Her children became her sole source of strength. Each time she felt them move, she reminded herself she had a reason to keep going. She couldn't give up. Day after day, Olga continued her fight, though her body and mind screamed for rest she couldn't afford. One evening, returning home after a grueling shift at the store, Olga felt a sharp pain in her stomach. She stopped in the middle of the street, clutching her belly as cold sweat dripped down her forehead. The pain was intense, but the overwhelming panic was worse. She knew the stress and overwork were taking a toll on her pregnancy. Breathing deeply to calm herself, she ignored offers of help from passers-by, too proud to accept. She slowly made her way home and collapsed onto her small couch, her body trembling with exhaustion. She knew this couldn't go on much longer. If something happened to her, her children would be in danger. But what could she do? Time was ticking, and the debt was insurmountable. Months later, after relentless work and endless struggles, Olga gave birth to twin boys. She was overjoyed, but knew life would only get harder. She barely slept, trapped in what felt like an endless cycle with no escape. Then, one evening, she received an unexpected call from her old friend Marina, who had heard about Olga's dire situation and wanted to offer help. "Olga, I know what you're going through, and I want to help," Marina said, her voice filled with concern. "I can't give you money, but there's a job opportunity in the U.S. working on a cruise ship. The pay is good, and you could clear your debt." Olga froze at the suggestion. A cruise job seemed like a good opportunity, but she knew it would be grueling work. Worst of all, it would mean leaving her children for weeks at a time. The thought terrified her. "I don't know, Marina." Olga hesitated. "What about my kids? I can't leave them alone." "You could leave them with your aunt for a while," Marina suggested. "I'll help when I can. Think about it. With that money, you could pay off the debt and start fresh." Olga hung up, unsure what to do. She knew she needed the job, but it was a tough decision. That night, she sat on her balcony, staring at the city lights and thinking about her children's future. Taking the cruise job might be the sacrifice she had to make to give them a better life. After much deliberation, Olga made her choice. She would take the job. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but for her children, she was ready to do anything. Blending fear and determination, Olga prepared for the next challenge. On the day she boarded the luxurious cruise ship, her heart was torn. On one hand, she felt hope at the chance to earn enough money to solve her financial problems. On the other, she was overwhelmed with sadness at leaving her children. Saying goodbye to them was one of the hardest moments of her life. She left them in the care of her elderly aunt, who, despite her age, happily agreed to look after the boys. Olga promised her children she wouldn't be gone long, though deep down, she wasn't sure how long this journey would take. When she arrived at the port, the massive cruise ship gleamed under the midday sun. The passengers boarding were wealthy families from high society who had paid a fortune for a vacation at sea. Everything exuded luxury, from the red carpets leading into the ship to the grand suites with balcony views. It was a completely different world, and for a moment, Olga thought, "This isn't for me." She adjusted the uniform they'd given her, a tight white shirt and elegant vest that made it hard to move comfortably. But Olga knew she had no choice. This job, though tough, was her only shot at paying off the debt and securing a future for her children. She took a deep breath and started her first day as a waitress on the cruise ship. The initial days were exhausting. Olga had never worked in such conditions. The passengers were incredibly demanding, and many didn't hesitate to belittle the staff, treating them as insignificant. The pressure was relentless, serving drinks, clearing tables, fulfilling endless requests, all with a smile that grew more forced each day. But Olga couldn't complain. She knew every workday brought her closer to her goal. Despite the long hours, there were moments when she couldn't help but marvel at the beauty around her. The endless ocean stretched beyond the horizon, and the gentle sound of waves against the ship's hull occasionally calmed her mind. In those rare moments, gazing at the horizon, she allowed herself to dream of the day she'd return to her children, free of debt and ready to start anew. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, Olga stepped onto the deck to catch her breath. The sea breeze tousled her hair, and for a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the cool air bring some relief. "Beautiful ocean, isn't it?" a voice said nearby. Olga turned to see Lena, a co-worker who had also recently started on the cruise. Lena was friendly and always tried to lift Olga's spirits when she looked worn out. "Yeah, it's stunning," Olga replied, feeling the weight of her exhaustion. "Don't worry, you'll get used to this pace," Lena said with a smile. "It's tough for everyone at first, but trust me, when you see your paycheck at the end of the month, you'll be amazed." Olga nodded, knowing it was true, but the physical and emotional toll was sometimes overwhelming. As they talked, Lena mentioned that a big dinner was happening that evening on the main deck for some of the ship's most influential passengers. All the waitstaff had been assigned specific tables, and Olga was tasked with serving one of the most prestigious groups. "You're lucky," Lena said with a grin. "Those guests often leave great tips. If you do well, you could make some serious cash tonight." Olga tried to see the upside, though the thought of serving the ship's elite made her nervous. She knew this was her chance and couldn't afford to mess it up. So, she pulled herself together and prepared to do her best. That evening, as the dinner began, Olga was ready. The main deck looked spectacular, with massive crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over elegantly set tables. Waiters and waitresses bustled about, serving gourmet dishes and expensive drinks. Olga steadied herself and approached the table she was assigned to. She noticed the guests were clearly important, conversing with an air of superiority. But then her gaze fell on one of the men at the table, and her breath caught in her throat. The world seemed to stop. There, dressed impeccably, sat Ivan. Olga couldn't believe her eyes. The man she thought had been dead for 7 years, Her husband, the father of her children, was sitting at the table, laughing and acting as if nothing had happened. Next to him was a stunning, sophisticated young woman speaking to him with obvious familiarity while he smiled and nodded in response. "This can't be," Olga whispered, barely audible. At that moment, Ivan looked up and their eyes met. But what happened next truly shattered her heart. His gaze lingered on her as if he recognized her, then quickly looked away, pretending she was just a waitress, a stranger in his luxurious world. Olga felt her heart break into 1,000 pieces. Questions flooded her mind, paralyzing her with shock. How could he be alive? Why hadn't he come back to her and their children? And who was this woman by his side? Her emotions swirled, but one thing became clear. Ivan had betrayed her in the cruelest way possible. Unable to bear it any longer, Olga carefully set the tray on the table and hurried out of the dining hall, tears streaming down her face. Though she tried to hold them back, the pain was too overwhelming. Ivan was alive, but the man she had once loved with all her heart was now a stranger. He had left her to struggle with his problems while he lived a life of luxury. That night, in her tiny cabin, Olga couldn't sleep. Her thoughts raced, unable to process what she had seen. The image of Ivan at that table, his smile, his indifference to her, replayed in her mind. The man she thought was dead, the father of her children, was alive and thriving with another woman. Every time she closed her eyes, his face appeared, making the pain unbearable. Olga got out of bed and wandered the ship's corridors, trying to calm herself, but nothing helped. She needed answers and resolved to get them. Gathering all her courage, Olga decided she had to confront Ivan. The next morning, after her shift, she went looking for him. She was told he could be found on the upper deck. Her heart pounded as she climbed the stairs, unsure of how he would react, but determined to find out why he had vanished from her life. When she reached the upper deck, she saw him again. Ivan stood by the railing, gazing at the horizon, while the young woman laughed and spoke to him. Olga couldn't hear what they were saying. Clenching her fists and taking a deep breath, she approached them. "Vanya," she called, her voice firm but thick with emotion. Ivan turned slowly, his face briefly showing surprise before reverting to cold indifference. "I'm sorry. You must be mistaken," he said politely, but his voice was icy. The young woman beside him looked at Ivan curiously, but didn't intervene, clearly trusting his words. "Don't you dare pretend you don't know me," Olga replied, her voice trembling with pain. "What are you doing here? How could you be alive?" Ivan looked at her, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion, guilt mixed with exhaustion, crossed his face. "You weren't supposed to be here," he said quietly. "It's not what you think, not what I think." Olga stepped closer, her voice growing sharper. "You're alive, Vanya. For the past 7 years, I thought you were dead. I raised our children alone, fought off the debts you left me with, and now you're just sitting here like nothing happened. Who is this woman?" The young woman beside Ivan looked at them, surprised. "Ivan, what's going on?" she asked in a quiet but confident voice. Ivan sighed deeply and finally met Olga's gaze. "I'm sorry, Olga," he began, his voice softer. "I know it's hard to understand, but I had to disappear. I had no choice." "Disappear?" Olga was stunned. "Disappear from what? From your children? From me? You left me with your debts, Ivan. I thought you were dead, and I've been hounded by collectors because of you." Ivan looked down, unable to hold her gaze any longer. "When I found out about the debt, I got scared," he continued. "It was too much, and I didn't see another way out. I thought the only way to escape the creditors was to disappear, to fake my death." Olga felt her legs weaken and leaned against the railing to keep from collapsing. "You faked your death?" she whispered, barely audible. "What about me? What about our children?" Ivan looked at her, with a sadness he had hidden until now. "I know I left you. It was cowardly, but I was scared and didn't know how else to get out of it. Then I met Katia," he said, gesturing to the woman beside him. His words pierced Olga like a knife. Everything she had endured over the past 7 years, sleepless nights, fear of creditors, raising their children alone, was the result of his choice to run away and start a new life with another woman. Her heart tore apart with pain and anger. "You stole everything from us," she cried, her voice shaking with hurt and fury. "You just ran away, left me and the kids, and for what? To be with her?" She pointed at Katia, who looked at Ivan with alarm. Ivan turned away, unable to meet Olga's eyes. He knew he was guilty. He had fled because he was too afraid to face the consequences of his actions. "I'm a coward," Ivan said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. "I ran away. I couldn't handle the debts. I thought disappearing would save you from all of it, but I was wrong." Olga stared at him, her heart pounding, tears streaming down her cheeks, not just from pain but from anger at his betrayal of her and their children. "Wrong," she repeated. "You left me to deal with those debts. I worked day and night, thinking you were dead, while you were out here enjoying yourself with another woman. How could you? How could you abandon your children? You have no idea what I've been through." Ivan still couldn't meet her gaze. Katia stood silently, listening to their exchange, unsure of what to say. "I made a mistake," Ivan continued, his voice barely audible. "But it's over now. I'm not the man you knew anymore." Olga paused, trying to process his words, but one question burned in her mind. "What are you going to do now?" Ivan sighed deeply, his face a mix of exhaustion and guilt. "I can't come back. If I do, the creditors will find me, and it'll cause even more problems. Katia and I were planning to leave the country after this cruise. It was our last chance to start over." Olga looked at him with contempt. Even now, when his lies had been exposed, he was thinking only of himself, of his own escape. "What about me?" she asked finally. "What about our children? Are you just going to abandon us again?" Ivan remained silent, with nothing to say. He had already made his choice. Olga suddenly realized that the man standing before her was no longer her husband. The Ivan she loved had died the moment he chose to fake his death. This was a stranger, willing to abandon his family for his own gain. "You're not the man I loved," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "You betrayed us. You betrayed your children, and you'll pay for it." Olga turned and walked away without another word, leaving Ivan and Katia on the deck. Her heart was breaking, but a new resolve was forming within her. Ivan wouldn't escape the consequences of his actions. Back in her small cabin, Olga sat on her bed, hugging herself and crying. She knew she couldn't keep enduring this pain. She wanted justice. Ivan had to answer for what he'd done, and she would do everything in her power to make sure he did. The next morning, Olga woke with a clear decision. She was done carrying this burden. Gathering her strength, she began planning her next steps. Olga decided to act quickly. That evening, she called the creditors who had been threatening her. "I have something you need," she said into the phone. "I know where Ivan is, and I have information that might interest you." There was a brief silence on the other end before a man's voice said, "Tell me." Olga shared what she knew, offering to help them catch Ivan in exchange for their promise to leave her and her children alone. She told them the cruise ship would return to the city in 3 days, giving them a chance to catch her former husband. "Fine," the creditor replied after a pause. "We'll help you, but if you try to double-cross us, you'll regret it." "I'm not trying to trick you," Olga said coldly. "I just want him to get what he deserves." For the next 3 days, Olga couldn't sleep. Her thoughts swirled around what was about to happen. She knew it was risky, but she had no choice. She couldn't live in fear anymore. Her children deserved better. The next morning, she continued her work, pretending everything was fine, though her emotions were in turmoil. She watched Ivan and Katia, who were oblivious to what awaited them, enjoying themselves. She knew the ship was about to dock. Finally, the evening arrived, and the ship reached its destination. Olga kept an eye on Ivan and sent a message to the creditors. They're in the dining hall now, about to disembark. Soon after, it began. The creditors were waiting at the port, disguised as ordinary passers-by, as Ivan and Katia descended the gangway. Suddenly, everything moved quickly. Ivan and Katia, so confident in their impunity, found themselves trapped. When Olga heard the commotion from the shore, she knew her plan had worked. She saw Ivan start a run, with a frightened Katia following. The creditors pursued them, determined not to let their target escape. Olga watched from the ship, her heart racing. She knew the moment had come, and it was about to end. "Vanya!" Katia screamed in desperation, grabbing his hand, seeking protection from a man who had promised her a new life. "What do we do?" Ivan was terrified, his eyes darting around for an escape, but the collectors had blocked all possible routes. "You're not getting away, punk," one of the collectors said coldly, staring at him. "You owe us a lot of money, and now you're going to pay." Katia pleaded with Ivan to do something, but he stood frozen, overwhelmed with panic. Olga watched the scene with a faint smile, her heart filled with conflicting emotions. She wanted justice, but seeing Ivan, once the man she loved, cornered and facing the consequences of his actions stirred something in her. "It's over," the collector said coldly. "You thought you could fool us and hide, but no one escapes us." Ivan, breathing heavily, raised his hands in surrender. He realized everything he'd built on lies and deceit had collapsed before his eyes. "I made a mistake," he said. "I thought I could start over. You owe a lot, and you're going to pay it all? Or else," the collector replied. At that moment, Olga stepped onto the shore, approaching them. Her face was calm, but inside, her emotions were a storm. "Vanya," she began, "you abandoned us. You ran from your responsibilities. You thought you could start a new life without a thought for us. I can't forgive you for that." Ivan looked at her, his eyes filled with regret and guilt. He opened his mouth to speak, but couldn't find the words. "You have to face the consequences of what you did," Olga continued, her voice now steady and resolute. "You can't just walk away from this." The creditors weren't waiting any longer. One of them signaled to his men, and two grabbed Ivan, twisting his arms behind his back. "We'll deal with him," the collector said to Olga. "He'll answer for his debts before the law." Olga nodded, understanding this was the end. Ivan would face punishment for his actions. While it wouldn't erase the years she'd spent in fear and loneliness, it gave her a sense of justice. Katia begged Ivan to do something, but it was futile. Olga watched as they led Ivan away, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. He was her husband, the father of her children, but the man she once loved was long gone. Later that night, Olga returned to her cabin, feeling as though she had finally shed the weight of the past. She couldn't change what had happened, but she was now free to rebuild her life. Her children were waiting for her at home, and they were the only thing that mattered now. The next morning, she left the cruise ship. Her journey, filled with pain, betrayal, and an unexpected reunion with her past, had come to an end. Before she left, the ship's captain called her into his office. "Olga," he said with respect, "I've been informed about your situation. We've watched these events unfold with regret. It's a tough situation. We know you have two young children, so here's a bonus. This should help you for a long time." Olga thanked him, her voice full of gratitude and exhaustion. "Thank you so much, Captain. I don't even know how to thank you. I was honored to work on your ship." With those words, she left his office and headed to the gangway. As she stepped off the ship, she felt a lightness she hadn't known in years. The years of suffering and hardship were behind her, Now, she was ready to return home to her children and start a new life. At the dock, her aunt greeted her with the twins. Olga ran to them, her heart overflowing with joy. She hugged her boys tightly, tears streaming down her face. But this time, they were tears of happiness. "I'll never leave you again," she promised, holding her sons close. "Everything's going to be okay now." Together, they headed home, where Olga knew a new life awaited. She no longer feared debts or betrayal. Her only goal now was to ensure her children's happiness and to start over. Meanwhile, Ivan's life was far from sweet. His debt to the collectors was enormous, and over the years he'd been in hiding, the interest had only grown, making the sum nearly impossible to pay. Acting within the law, the collectors offered him two choices: prison for failing to meet his financial obligations or working off the debt under their supervision. Ivan chose the latter, hoping to salvage something from the situation. His assets, including a car and what little savings he had, were seized to cover part of the debt. He was forced to work for the collectors, performing grueling physical labor at warehouses. The jobs were low-paying, and the work was exhausting, but it kept him out of prison. Ivan became increasingly withdrawn, focusing solely on his work and avoiding interaction with others, trying to stay under the radar. Each month, he paid small amounts toward the debt, though he had no idea when or if he'd ever climb out of the financial hole. He clung to a faint hope for a better future, but deep down, he knew the life he'd once dreamed of was out of reach, likely forever. While Ivan paid for his mistakes, Olga built her new life. She opened a small bakery that brought in a steady income. Her children grew up happy and healthy, surrounded by the love and care of their mother and aunt. Olga let go of the past, focusing on the future. She knew she was a strong woman, capable of overcoming any challenge, and her life was now filled with new possibilities. Thank you for listening to the story until the end. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends and loved ones. It motivates us to keep working on new stories every day. Don't miss the next amazing story that's about to appear on your screen. We're very grateful to have you with us. See you soon.